Hello scribes, welcome to my channel. It's Pika Lee, and I'm here with a video for you about how to watch movies like a writer. I know it sounds really simple to watch a movie like a writer, but to be completely honest, there are actual ways to watch a movie without thinking of it like an audience. You're going to analyze the story, and that means you're going to look for very specific details, write those down in your notes. That way you can see from a different perspective what worked about it and what didn't. Of course, my ultimate goal is that you actually learn story from it, learn the structure and how it works. So ideally, you'd want to be doing this with a film that you actually really like or love, or maybe even just an Oscar award-winning one. If you're going to look into a movie that is not so good, you might want to write down things that didn't work, memorable details that didn't help the story. And that's what I mean by coming at it from a different perspective. In the end, all I want you to do is learn from other writers. But more than that, you're also going to learn from this process what you like personally, and you can sort out a little bit more of your own voice. The first thing that I suggest is watching the movie that you actually like. Something that you're interested in, something that has the same writing style or the same genre that you want to write for in the future. Doing that gives you some field research about the types of end products that you're going to create, because you are essentially creating the script that is going to translate onto screen, just like these projects had to do. And if you're watching a movie that you don't like, I strongly suggest that you still keep within the same genre and the same sort of style that you thought would have worked in what you want to create. That way you can work backwards and see what didn't work so you can avoid them altogether. And note that I'm talking mostly about movies and feature films because television, it can be sustainable for multiple seasons. And there's a lot that you need to consider when you're looking into how a storyline goes through multiple episodes. And that is the only reason why I want to take a little bit more time to really go into that area with you at a later time. But feel free to drop down below any of your own personal tips for others about how you like to watch any sort of television and write down notes about that for story analysis purposes. Sharing is caring. The next few things are going to be very story oriented. So the next tip that I have for you today is going to be going through story structure or a story beat sheet and watching it and filling it in along with what you're watching. So if you're watching a movie like, let's say, Uncharted, which I recently got to watch, you might recognize certain beats in that movie that are going to fit the story structure that we know and love. The 3-act structure, of course, but if you have a different sort of sequence and beat sheet that you work off of, try to identify what you're currently learning and what suits your style of writing and how you like to outline your stories, and try to match them up to the movie that you're watching. And once you go through and you're able to identify certain things, such as sort of the inciting incident, or you're really able to identify the midpoint of the movie, then you can go ahead and lay it all through, take a look at it and see if it matches time-wise. You should be watching this at home. You have more freedom, and it's not like you can't do this at the movie theater. I do it all the time. But what I do suggest is, if you're watching it at home, try to look at that little timeline at the bottom. It shows you when you hit the very midpoint. You can always figure that out because it's directly in the center of that timeline. And check your work in that way. So let's move on. Now the next part that I like to focus on is the characters. And that's because at this point, I already pretty much have it down as to who is the main character. And then once I've got those pretty much delved out, I like to go into the next step. Because yes, just getting the characters down is sort of its own step. You really have to work to identify who the main players of this whole story is going to be. And sometimes I like to jot down just a few sentences about who they are truly into the story and what their purpose for the story is, because every character should have a purpose. So if you can identify any characters who are pretty well featured in the story and aren't doing very much, that's a good tip that this writing isn't handling having these characters help move things along. The next most important part that I want you to focus on for story is going to be the character arcs. And yes, I said arcs, because for the most part, you do have the very main character who's got a goal and who is going to really change throughout this whole process of the story. Now, villains and antagonists also somewhat have a arc, and this is in writing that includes a sort of backstory for these characters.
Come here. Hey. Look at me. So I had a wife. She was beautiful. Like you. Who tells me I worry too much? Who tells me I ought to smile more? Who gambles and gets in deep with the sharks? Hey. One day they carve her face. We have no money for surgeries. She can't take it. I just want to see her smile again. I just want her to know that I don't care about the scars. So, I stick a razor in my mouth and do this to myself. And you know what? She can't stand the sight of me. Well, you look nervous.
A lot of times these characters have a reason for doing what they do. And if they don't, well, they may be a little bit of a flat character. And we really want to create very prominent, three-dimensional, and complex characters, because those are the ones that we tend to enjoy. The next thing that I really like to do when I'm researching and analyzing a film is trying to find out what films are comparable to these. This is something that they talk about often when you're pitching your idea. What films is your story similar to? If you had two grandparent films, what would they be? If you can notate something like that for these films that you're watching and try to identify what they most feel similar to, it makes it easier to research those other films to see what elements they drew from that one and was it successful also. Read the script. Now this part is important because when you get to analyze those other films, including the film that you're watching, you're going to want to read the actual scripts, because if you're going to do this total research on the field, you're going to want to see how it translates onto the screen and what was written to convey that, especially in something like animation or something that's going to have a lot of CGI. How do they write it so that it translates the style and the substance onto the screen in the way that you want to do that in the future with your writing, and how to cultivate that down into paper concisely without looking like you haven't done your research. Now, reading the script will help you with tricky formatting that you may want to include in your storytelling style, and it will help you with looking at how dialogue is portrayed on the page. And it's a great way to sort of study that and understand a little bit more about writers and how they put their personality onto the page and get the story put onto the big screen with the help of everyone collaborating around them. Those are all my tips for today, scribes. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you join me for the next one. And until then, happy writing.